You've gone through moments like this before, even if you never really stop to think about them in detail. You greet someone, you lean in for a hug, and for just a brief second, something feels slightly different. It's not dramatic, nothing you can clearly point at, but there's a subtle shift in how that moment lands. Sometimes it feels quick and empty, like a simple routine you've done 100 times before. Other times, there's a pause, a slight stillness, something that gives the moment a bit more weight than expected. Most men overlook that completely. They treat every hug the same way, as if it's just a basic formality before moving on to conversation. Something automatic, something that doesn't carry any real meaning. And because of that mindset, they miss what's actually happening in those small moments. Because the truth is, not all hugs feel the same. And more importantly, they don't unfold the same way. If you slow it down and really pay attention, you'll notice the difference. There are times when the hug ends almost instantly. No hesitation, no shift in energy, just a quick contact and release. Then there are moments where something changes. The ending doesn't happen right away. There's a slight delay, a brief pause that makes the interaction feel different. That difference may seem small, but it matters more than most people realize. Now think about what that difference actually represents. It's not about the hug itself being special. It's about what that moment reveals beneath the surface. A hug is one of the few interactions where there is no space left between two people. No distance, no time to think too much, no opportunity to adjust or perform in a controlled way. For a brief second, everything becomes immediate. Whatever is felt internally shows up directly, without explanation. That's why those small variations stand out when you begin to notice them. They are not random details, they are responses. Most people don't consciously decide how a hug should feel. They don't think, let me make this one different. The body reacts automatically based on comfort, awareness, and whatever is being experienced in that exact moment. That is why some hugs feel structured and controlled, while others feel relaxed and natural. You might notice that some interactions end quickly without any change in rhythm, while others slow down just slightly before releasing. That difference is not something planned. It happens because something internally caused the body to respond differently. Once you understand that, you stop looking at these moments as routine gestures. Instead, you begin to recognize that even simple physical contact can carry information, not through obvious signs, but through subtle changes in timing, pressure, and presence. And once you become aware of that, you start seeing patterns that were always there, just unnoticed. Once you begin to notice these small differences, the next question naturally comes up. Why does one moment feel completely neutral, while another carries a slight charge, even when nothing obvious has changed on the surface? The answer has less to do with what is said, and more to do with how the body reacts in real time. Most people believe connection is built mainly through conversation, through words, tone, and what is being expressed. But in close physical moments, the body responds before any of that fully registers. When a hug happens, the distance between two people disappears instantly. There is no buffer left, no time to filter or overthink what is happening. The response becomes immediate. It is felt, not analyzed. That is why those subtle differences exist in the first place. Now think about how people behave when there is no emotional weight in a moment. Everything becomes automatic. Movements are quick, casual, almost mechanical. There is no reason for the body to slow down or adjust. But the moment something shifts internally, even in a small way, the body reflects it. The timing changes slightly. The pressure may feel different. The release may not happen as quickly as expected. These are not dramatic signals. They are small reactions that show something is being processed. Most men misunderstand this because they jump straight to extremes. They assume any difference must mean strong interest or clear rejection, when in reality most interactions exist somewhere in between. That middle space is where most of the real information exists, and it's the part most men completely miss. Instead of understanding that subtle reactions come from something still forming, they try to force a clear meaning onto it immediately. But not every shift is a final answer. Many of these moments are simply the body responding to something that hasn't been fully processed yet. That is why the reaction feels different, but not extreme. Sometimes the body becomes slightly more controlled, almost like it is holding itself in place while something is being felt internally. Other times, it slows down just enough to create a small pause before the moment ends. These are not signals in the obvious sense, they are reflections of an internal state that is still developing. And because that state isn't fully clear even to the person experiencing it, the reaction shows up in small, subtle ways. This is where the key idea comes in. A hug doesn't create emotion, it reveals it. It shows what is already present in that moment, without the filter that usually comes with words. Words can be adjusted, shaped, and controlled. Physical interaction happens too quickly for that level of control. It exposes what is there before the mind has time to manage it. That is why you often feel the difference before you understand it. Your body registers it instantly, while your mind tries to explain it afterward. And once you recognize that, you stop treating these moments as random and start seeing them as part of how people naturally respond to each other. Now let's look at the kind of interaction most people don't think twice about. It happens quickly, almost automatically. You go in for the hug, there's brief contact, maybe a light tap on the back, and then it's over. No pause, no shift, no change in rhythm. It feels clean, simple, and predictable. And that's exactly what it is. A neutral moment that doesn't carry any deeper weight. This is where many men get it wrong. They either ignore it completely or they try to force meaning into it that isn't there. They start asking themselves if they missed something or if there was hidden intention behind it. But when a moment ends immediately without any variation in timing or pressure, it usually means nothing changed internally during that interaction. There was no reason for the body to slow down or adjust. That doesn't mean something is wrong. It doesn't mean rejection either. It simply means the interaction stayed at a surface level. The mistake comes when you react emotionally to that. Some men become discouraged and assume there is no potential, while others try to compensate by forcing more energy into the next interaction. The better approach is to recognize it as a baseline. When everything feels consistent and structured every time, you are seeing a pattern of surface-level connection that hasn't developed yet, and that's where your focus should shift. When you start recognizing that baseline, your attention needs to shift away from the hug itself and toward everything surrounding it. Because physical moments don't change on their own, they reflect what has already been built through interaction over time. If every contact feels quick, structured, and ends without variation, it usually means the connection hasn't moved beyond a surface level yet. Not negative, not positive, just undeveloped. This is where most men go wrong. They try to change the physical moment directly, instead of improving the foundation behind it. They think if they adjust how they hug, hold longer, or act differently in that moment, something will change. But that approach doesn't work because the body doesn't respond to forced actions. It responds to genuine comfort and familiarity that develop over time. So instead of focusing on the hug, you need to focus on the environment that leads to it. The conversation, the energy you bring, the level of comfort that exists before any physical contact happens. Those are the things that shape how the body responds in close moments. When that foundation is stable, the physical interaction naturally begins to shift. Another important thing to understand is that neutral moments are steady. They don't carry tension, they don't create confusion, and they don't require interpretation. That's why they feel easy. But easy doesn't always mean meaningful. So your goal is not to force depth into a neutral interaction, but to build the conditions where depth can develop naturally over time. Now let's move into the moment most men notice but rarely understand properly. Everything starts like any other interaction. You go in for the hug, contact is made, and at first nothing seems different. But right when the moment should end, it doesn't release immediately. There's a slight delay, a small pause that you can feel, even if you can't fully explain it. It's not long enough to draw attention from others, but it's enough for you to recognize that something shifted. This is where things become interesting, because that pause is not random. It represents a hesitation in ending the moment. Not a dramatic one, not something planned, but a natural response where the body doesn't rush to disengage. Most men misinterpret this immediately. They either jump to the conclusion that it must mean strong attraction, or they dismiss it completely because it doesn't fit into a clear category. The truth sits somewhere in between. That brief delay usually means the moment carried more awareness than expected. Something registered internally, even if it wasn't fully defined. When an interaction is purely neutral, it ends cleanly without hesitation. But when there's even a slight internal shift, the timing changes just enough to be noticeable. What matters here is not labeling the pause, but recognizing that the interaction didn't follow a completely automatic pattern, and that alone tells you something changed. What happens after that pause is just as important, sometimes even more important than the pause itself. Because the moment doesn't end with the contact, it continues into what comes next. You separate, and for a brief second, there's a transition. The body resets, space returns, and now the interaction either continues naturally or drops back to neutral. That shift tells you whether the moment carried forward or simply passed. If the energy stays consistent, if she remains present, maintains even brief eye contact, and the conversation flows without interruption, it means the moment didn't break anything. Whatever was felt during that pause didn't disrupt the connection. It carried through into the next phase of the interaction. That continuity is important because it shows stability. The moment didn't create tension or distance. Now compare that to a different outcome. You separate and immediately the energy changes. There's a small break in flow, eye contact disappears, and everything feels like it reset. That doesn't require overanalysis. It simply means the moment didn't build anything beyond itself. And that's fine. Not every interaction needs to. The mistake most men make here is trying to control what happens next. They rush to speak, force eye contact, or try to extend the moment unnaturally. But the key is to let the transition happen without interference, because that's where the real clarity shows itself. There are moments that end cleanly, and then there are moments that don't fully let go. This is where things become even more subtle, because nothing obvious is happening on the surface. There are no clear signals, no dramatic changes, nothing you can easily point to. Yet something about the interaction feels like it hasn't completely reset. You separate physically, but the energy doesn't drop right away. It lingers just slightly, and that's where most men fail to pay attention. Instead of noticing that lingering space, they look for something clear and immediate. They want something they can label, something they can define quickly. But this doesn't work like that. It's not about what is happening in an obvious way. It's about what hasn't ended. That's the difference. The interaction doesn't snap back to neutral. There's a brief hold in the moment, a slight extension in how it feels. You might notice that neither of you rushes to move on. Eye contact stays a fraction longer. Movement feels slower. The conversation doesn't immediately take over. That lack of urgency is what gives the moment weight. But here's where most men make a mistake. They interrupt it. They feel the shift and react too quickly, speaking too soon or creating distance unnecessarily. Instead of letting that space exist, they try to control it. And in doing that, they remove what made the moment different in the first place. By now, you can see that none of these moments are loud or obvious. They don't come with clear labels or direct explanations. They exist in small shifts, in timing, in how something feels rather than what is clearly said or done. And this is exactly where most men lose the opportunity to understand what's really happening. Not because they didn't notice the moment, but because they reacted to it too quickly. The second something feels slightly different, they try to do something about it. They rush forward, trying to create more, or they pull back, unsure of what it means. In both cases, they interrupt the natural flow of the interaction. But moments like these don't need action, they need stability. They need you to stay grounded while they unfold. There is a difference between being passive and being aware. Passive means you disconnect. Aware means you stay present without forcing anything. You observe without interfering. That is what allows the interaction to develop naturally. Because clarity doesn't come from analyzing a single moment. It comes from seeing how multiple moments connect over time. When you stop trying to define everything immediately, something changes. You become more relaxed, more consistent, easier to engage with. There's no pressure, no forced energy. You're simply present. And that presence is what allows you to understand the moment clearly without needing to control it.